Hello and welcome to this GO1 webinar. Thanks for joining us today. My name is Scott Cooper. I am the Global Head of Marketing at GO1, and today we've got some great guests that are going to be here to have a bit of a chat with us about some of the new content that they're producing and be able to walk us through that. We've got Cindy Pascale and Guy Harris from Vado on the line, who we're going to be talking to in just a second, and they're going to be talking about how to create more effective and productive working relationships using a new toolkit that Vado has produced. Vado have been working alongside GO1 for a while now. They've been one of our more popular choices in content. They've been used globally across the world, and our customers have been raving about the content that they're producing. So we've been very excited when we heard that they are producing a new toolkit that we can use here. And we're excited to run through that with you today, and so you can learn a little bit more about. I might bring up Cindy first to have a bit of a chat about Vado in general. So if you haven't heard of them before, you learn a little bit about who they are, what they're doing. How are you today, Cindy?
Oh, good. Thank you very much, Scott. As you heard, my name is Cindy Pascale. Thank you for attending. Vado is a GO1 premium content provider. We have over 400 courses in our catalog. They're micro-learning, mobile responsive courses on management and leadership development, employee business skills, sales, and HR compliance courses. Today we're here to talk about our newest set of courses around DISC, and Guy Harris is going to be talking about the DISC assessment and the DISC courses that we created with Guy Harris and the Kevin Eikenberry group.
Oh, so how you doing today, Cindy? Good to be here.
Yes.
So, my name's Guy Harris. My partner Kevin Eikenberry and I are in the leadership development space in terms of what our business is all about, and we create content and courses around that idea. And we worked with Vado on some other courses in the past, and now that relationship came a discussion around the DISC or DISC toolkit. So Kevin is a leadership author, teacher, consultant. I am a leadership author, teacher, consultant. We co-authored From Bud to Boss. Kevin's written some other books and co-authored some books. We've got lots of blogs and podcasts and stuff. So basically, what that says is we're in the information application business is the idea. So we like to work on creating content and resources that not only teach the information, but inspire people to application of the ideas, hopefully so they actually get results from it rather than just filling their head with knowledge. And from that, you know, our focus in business and the partnership with Vado, we developed the DISC toolkit. And in case you're not familiar with the DISC model, I think probably most people who look at this kind of product would have some familiarity with the DISC model. But to make sure we're all on the same page, I'll say what the DISC model is, where it came from, and then talk about how what we're trying to do to apply this in practical ways. The DISC model actually is not that new. It starts with a book by a guy named William Moulton Marston, published in 1928. It's called The Emotions of Normal People, and the really key word there in that title is normal, implying that everything that we're talking about here, applying the DISC model, is what would be in the normal range of human behavior. It captures no disease or illness or abnormality or anything like that. It's completely normal behaviors. They're just 4 different ways of behaving and interacting with the world. And based on his work, it's developed through assessments produced by a number of different publishers, and some of the languaging is different today than it was in 1928, and because lots of people have been involved in the development of the application tools for the model, there are different words used to describe things. But the basic idea is the model itself is based on a 2-drive, 4-quadrant description of behavior. So you see it on the right is the diagram that we use in the teaching and training we do. And it breaks down the idea that we have 2 drives that essentially create our behavior, and those drives affect how we perceive and interpret and interact with the world. And when you put the 2 drives together on a perpendicular axis, you get 4 quadrants. And what these different behavioral traits show up in communication preferences and motivations and work styles and how people tend to interact. And in fact, in terms of how people often interpret the world and interpret the interactions of other people. So we get back to the starting idea that Scott talked about. The idea is to apply this so you can get better and more productive work relationships, so that you can become a better leader, so you can become better at resolving conflicts, so that you can learn how to work with your coworkers better and understand some of the things that happen when you have conflicts with your coworkers. In fact, I had a conversation with a guy today. It's a guy I've known for a number of years, and we've both worked with the DISC model and our separate spheres of the world. And we talked about how, in our conversation, it came up how simple little misunderstandings can turn into conflicts or misinterpretations that then impact results. And so I'm actually going to reference some studies I've seen that say that unresolved conflict in the workplace, or conflicts in the workplace, which generally kind of trace back to breakdowns of communication, can turn into something like 2/3 of the employee performance problems. So the issue with communication becomes a very real world, help my organization be successful kind of tool, because it helps stop or correct the communication breakdowns that cause conflict that get in the way of getting results. So I think it's a really practical tool. It's pretty simple to describe and understand. When you put the two drives together and get the 4 quadrants, it really gets pretty simple. I can take 10 minutes with someone and have them understand the general idea. Application might take a little more study, but awareness and understanding can start pretty simply. And basically it comes down to this idea that if we look at 2 drives of human behavior, one being what we call the pace drive, which is represented by the vertical line there where it says outgoing at the top and reserved at the bottom. That represents how people, the pace people tend to interact with the world, or the speed with which people feel comfortable making decisions. It can often be related to how much information they feel like they need in order to feel comfortable with the decision. So on the outgoing side, it says people move fast, talk fast, decide fast. Probably don't need a lot of data to decide. And then on the reserve side, it's more contemplative, more consider your words, maybe a little bit softer spoken, that kind of thing. So if outgoing, move fast, talk fast, decide fast, and reserved is a little more contemplative, a little more gather data before you decide. And then the other drive is the left-right drive, which is called the priority drive, which is related to the direction people tend to think or process in the world. Left side represents people more task-oriented, form, function, process, analysis, data. And on the right side, and people who tend to have a more people-oriented perspective, meaning when we say orientation, the filter people put on the world in terms of how they perceive things. So on the task-oriented side, people tend to filter the world through how does this interaction or event affect my ability to get things done. And on the right side, people will have the people-oriented perspective, tend to filter the world through a perspective that says, how does this interaction or this task or this thing we're doing impact our relationship? And I don't want to imply that either of them is good or bad. They're all within the range of normal. They just tend to be the filters we put on the world in terms of how we filter and process and interact with the world. So you get the outgoing task-oriented combination. That's the dominant style. That's the language we use in our training resources. And people with dominant style tend to have a make it happen, get it done sort of perspective. Then there's an outgoing people-oriented perspective. We call that the inspiring style, and tends to be focused on having fun and telling stories and interacting and relating and connecting with people. Working with people is a big deal there with people who have a lot of inspiring traits. And then you have the reserved people-oriented trait that's a supportive style. And what tends to show up in people that have that trait tend to be very encouraging and supportive and helpful. Tend to have a more gentle approach with people. And then you have the reserved task-oriented style, the cautious style, that tends to have a very high focus on quality and accuracy and data. So we have kind of a get it right, check your facts perspective. Now, why does that matter? It matters because when we have people who interact with different styles, we tend to perceive each other in often negative ways. I won't go all the way around and talk about all of them, but here's kind of an example. It is not uncommon for people who have a very strong dominant trait and don't have much of the supportive trait. And basically the way I phrase that kind of precedes an idea we talk about, that people really blends of these traits, not just one of them. But to keep it simple, we'll talk about 4 styles. A person has a lot of dominant traits, doesn't have a lot of supportive trait. might perceive the encouraging supportive behavior of a person with supportive trait as weak. So they can call it a negative thing because they don't understand it. Or flip side, a person with supportive trait might look at a person who has a lot of dominant trait and say they're rude and pushy. Well, not necessarily. They're just trying to get stuff done. And the idea is if we can help people understand this model and understand how to apply it, it can really significantly change how they interact and perceive and interact with other people. So you have these 4 different styles, and most people are introduced to this idea through the source, through an assessment of some kind. And the idea about the DISC model is it's a public domain model. No one owns it. And if you come to the table already having some awareness of the DISC model and you see our toolkit, you might find some languaging that's slightly different from what you've been exposed to, although the underlying foundational ideas are the same. And when I say public domain model, it's I would equate it, so I'm an engineer by training, master's and bachelor's in chemical engineering, and served in the U.S. Navy as a nuclear engineer. So I've got lots of engineering training. And so I had a lot of math. Calculus is math that I took. Well, calculus nobody owns. There are lots of publishers who publish calculus textbooks. And while the description or approach might be a little different, the underlying idea is exactly the same. And that's why it's important to understand the DISC model, nobody owns it. It's just a model that's in the public domain, and there are lots of different publishers, and every publisher has their own way to describe or teach the model. And I would say that probably all of them have validity. They're based on the same foundational idea. The most common entry point people have for learning about the DISC model is to, at some point, take an assessment. Either an employer or a friend introduces them to the assessment, they take the assessment, and often their knowledge stops right there. Whatever's in that report is where it stops. They might have a few minutes conversation with their team. They might have some fun laughing about the differences with each other, and they stop really at sort of the I'm aware of the model level and don't really know how to apply it. And typical uses, the reason people take assessments are to build teams and reduce conflict and improve communication and build leadership skills. And people have these ideas in mind by taking the assessment. And the assessment's a really good start. It just doesn't really take you all the way to knowing how to get the real value out of the effort of taking the assessment or purchasing the assessment. So the limitation of it is that knowing about the model doesn't necessarily teach you how to apply it. That it stays kind of at the head knowledge state. And frankly, application of this is more in the emotional and relational realm than it is in the factual realm. And here's what I mean by that. So, for example, my wife and I are completely different. I'm really reserved. I like to be by myself, and she's very outgoing and she likes to go to parties. Well, if we don't understand that about each other, I think she's a flake and she thinks I'm boring. And knowing the model doesn't help me understand my wife better. Sitting with her and talking with her about how our different perspectives line up helps me understand her better. But that's more of an emotional, relational knowledge than a factual knowledge. So I'd say that, perfect world scenario, we'd be able to have people take assessments. They would sit down with their coworkers and have these deep conversations about how to interact with each other. And that's just not how I've seen the world work. So we created the DISC toolkit, hopefully, to bridge that gap a little bit. And while we can't sit individually with every person who takes a DISC assessment, and we can't coach everyone personally, what we can do is give people a window into the world of other people so they understand it better. So we created the DISC toolkit, try to address the limitation so that people can actually learn how to apply the learning they get from assessments and any other resources, any other books or resources they might have at their disposal to try to understand the DISC model at a deeper level. So that's why we created it. And it's created with 17 e-learning courses. And I'll get into why there are 17 courses here in a second. And because it's a public domain model, and we know that there are so many different ways of talking about it, we wanted to create something that would be as universally applicable as we could possibly make it. And I'm not going to pretend that Kevin and I know every single way that every single publisher in the world talks about the DISC model. We're familiar with a lot of them, though. And so one of the 17 modules is basically a translation module to help people know how to hear what we're talking about and apply it to anything they might have learned somewhere else. So if they have a different assessment tool than say the one that we provide, that at least know how our language applies to the information they have in front of them. So we've attempted to make it as universal as we can possibly make it. And the approach that we've taken in developing this training resource is that it's a series of videos that are conversational in nature. They show the interaction between people of different styles. So one of the key points is, rather than have like a talking head video where it's Guy talking about how people with D traits interact with people with I traits, and how people with D traits interact with people with S traits, and just having one person deliver a headshot, here's what we're doing. We've created this toolkit in a way that has conversations with people of different styles. So as people are watching the videos and reading through the written materials, they are seeing the interaction between a person who has dominant traits and a person who has inspiring traits, and a person who has supportive traits and a person who has cautious traits. So we have members of our team who represent the 4 different quadrants interacting with each other and conversing about how they might interact with each other better. So what we hope to do is create a really dynamic environment where you can see someone who is similar to you interacting with someone who's not like you, so that you can hopefully apply what you see in their interaction to your personal interactions in the world. And in developing the content, we actually created it in a way so that it's delivered in each person's, what we'll call DISC language. And the example of that would be that everything that is delivered for people with dominant traits to learn how to interact with other people better is delivered in what we would call dominant language. We try to speak the language of get it done, move fast. And so an example would be, you're a person who has a lot of dominant traits. How can you interact with a person with dominant traits better? And let me just get right to the point and tell you, it also says that for dominant person interacting with a person with inspiring traits, dominant traits interacting with supportive, dominant traits interacting with cautious. So we've done that for all 4 styles, said, here's how you adapt your style to better connect with a person who has this other style. So there's like I style to S style in I language. So it's going to be more fun and lighthearted and spoken in a way that's more connected to how a person with inspiring traits might naturally perceive the world. Likewise, with people with supportive traits or cautious traits. We've created modules that speak to a person in their natural style, and at the same time shows them interacting with other people. And so hopefully what we've done is given people, beyond just the information, a little bit of that emotional and relational hook, so that they can bridge the gaps and start learning how to apply the information better. So the idea is, we think that what we've put together is a toolkit that's going to teach people how to better understand and work more effectively with people of all communication styles, and do it in a way that's pretty fast and pretty effective, and hopefully we think pretty cost effective, because it's done on people's own time and their own schedule. And I think we're back to now questions or comments from Cindy or Scott.
Yeah. Thanks, Guy. That's really good. I really like this model and being able to tie it back directly to the learners on that. Before I ask any questions, just if anyone that's listening in today, if anyone has questions, there is a section in your webinar navigation there where you can ask a question. You can type one in. If there's anything you want to ask, just type it in there, and then we'll be able to relay that to Guy, and he'll be able to provide an answer. But I'll kick some things off because I've got a couple of questions in here.
Yeah.
Guy, we're talking about the assessment in there,
Mm-hmm.
and I know you have some tools around that. Do the assessments vary dramatically? What's the process on that? How long does it take? You ever provide a little more info around that for people?
Yeah, sure. There are a number of different ways it's done. One really common way is to provide a number of questions. Some are 24, some are 32, some are 30. So there's a different number of questions based on the publisher. And it's typically done in a most like me, least like me sort of format. So they'll ask a question or phrase a situation and say, of these words, which is most like you and which is least like you? Or in this situation, how would you most likely respond? How would you least likely respond? And so people go through an assessment process where they answer those questions. Most of the time it takes, it shouldn't take more than about 10 or 15 minutes to take an assessment. I'd say if you take more than that, you're probably analyzing it too much. It really is kind of a what's your first impression kind of answer to it. Their assessments are provided a number of ways. Many of them today are provided online, although there are some providers who also have written tools, so both written and online. The online versions generally provide a report in the form of like a PDF that's generated post-assessment. And it's a pretty fast assessment and remarkably accurate too. I mean, they probably run, the DISC assessment will probably run somewhere around the 90% face validity value. And there are a couple of different ways you can interpret that. You can say that it's, if you read your report, you'll say it's about 90% accurate and 10% you wouldn't agree with. Or you could say that 90% of people say it's 100% right. So basically, it's a good window. It is not a tool to try to analyze what's wrong with people. It's really a powerful communication tool to help people figure out how they're different from other people.
Yeah. So with that, when you get your answer spat out, is that going to result in you're this one particular type and that's what you need to focus on, or does that then help you decide I'm this particular type but heavily influenced by this particular subset as well? A bit of a blend.
So people are really blends of these traits, and what'll tend to happen is you'll have one that's your primary trait and one that's secondary, sometimes two secondaries. There are rare occasions where people are equally blended all four. It does happen. It's just not all that frequent. Most people, somewhere around 80%, are going to have two traits that are pretty strong, and about 15% of people have three traits that are pretty strong. And so what an assessment will do is it'll identify what is your strongest trait and then what are your secondary traits. And then how that maps to using the DISC toolkit, I would say, like if I took an assessment, I'll use myself. I have a blend of cautious, dominant, and supportive traits. I would probably want to look at the cautious modules, the dominant modules, and the supportive modules out of the toolkit. I would take my assessment, read the assessment results, and then probably watch those different modules related to my styles so I could get better understanding how I could better adjust to other people. Does that help answer the question, Scott?
Yeah, no, that's good. So once you've got that, do people go into a pathway or specific courses that are targeted at a particular type of the 17? How do they sort of navigate their way through that once they've completed that assessment?
Oh, so once you enter the course dashboard, then you would select the modules that best connect to your style blend. Yeah.
Cool. All good. You mentioned there's a few different interpretations of how to apply this model. Do you find people sort of tweak that, customize that to sort of suit their organization or their particular use case regularly, or people generally apply sort of straight out of the box, sort of what we've got defined here?
What I see is that different publishers, they'll have just a different way to say it, and it's the same idea, and then they'll develop all their resources around that languaging. And it all relates, it's all going to come back to the same thing. The most common way to present it is for people to present, say, the dominant trait and have a number of words that start with D that describe that trait. And if you look at any list of words from any publisher, you'll probably find all the same words in the list. It's just which one do people tend to focus on using it to call like what I would call the keyword for that trait. One person might call it driver or director, and we would call it dominant. It's all the same thing.
Makes complete sense. Evaluation of this when you come through, what are some of the things you see around the best ways to determine has this had an impact in the workplace? Obviously, there's the clear one, which is are people communicating better internally? But what other things should people be looking out for when they're finishing up a program like this and workers are heading in and applying it?
So I'd say the thing to be looking for is increased awareness by people of how different people perceive things. And that can show up in a number of ways. That can show up in how people interact with their coworkers, how people interact with their supervisor, how supervisors interact with team members. And I think if people take a a holistic approach and realize this is about human relations, not just about workplace. Ideally, you'd see that show up in how people interact with customers too, that they would be more sensitive and aware of how different customers might communicate and adjust to them. So hopefully we get better customer service out of it. Hopefully get less conflict out of it, assuming it's applied properly.
Yep. No, that sounds good. Cindy, did you have any questions that you wanted to ask Guy? I feel like I'm hogging him.
Well, I just want to make a comment. We've talked a little bit about the DISC assessment, and I wanted to make sure that the audience today knows that the DISC assessment is not part of the DISC e-learning toolkit.
Right. Good point, Cindy.
Yeah. And I also wanted to mention that the DISC e-learning toolkit is available or will be real soon on the GO1 platform.
Yep, that's right. We'll have everything ready very soon. If there is anyone that's on this that does want to try that out and make sure they get first access to that, you can drop us an email at the email that's on the screen there. Was there anything final that you wanted to add, Cindy or Guy, before we wrap things up today?
I have nothing else, Scott.
Nothing else? Awesome. Well, thank you very much to everyone that's tuned in today. I think this is a really valuable skill set that's not just going to improve the workplace. It's a general life improvement in knowing how to interact with people and can really change the way you think about others and how they're going to react to things. So I think it's a really valuable skill set. You've done a great job pulling that together, Guy and Cindy, for making that available to everyone in there. So really looking forward to having people going in and trying this out and seeing how it impacts their workplace.
Oh, thanks, Scott.
Like I said, thanks for joining. Thanks for coming on, Cindy and Guy. Really appreciate your time today. Thank you to everyone that's joined. I hope you've got some value out of this today, and we look forward to seeing you on the next webinar we run. Thank you, everyone, and have a good day.
Bye-bye.
Bye.